old-time country music.
If you listen to Sweetheart of the Radio, it's not like, wow, they really rocked up country music. They are playing country music. The fact that it's rock musicians playing it is what was significant. For rock listeners, it might as well have been, you know, any country artist you can name, for as country as it sounds.
Well, I think they did some country songs, but they did it their style. It was good, but in my opinion, it wasn't country. It had the rock and roll feel to it. It had the Byrds feel to it. Drums, bass, that 12-string guitar. Nobody else in country music ever used a 12-string guitar that I know of.
And yet, it made it possible to do that, and people started rethinking crossover. That's what they called it. Some promotion man's definition of something that naturally appeals to a lot of people because it's good.
It was something that was going on, where guys who grew up playing country music, played rock and roll, and at a certain point they combined them. So I think it was a label that was placed on that record as a means of selling it to the public. Yeah. What's rock and roll about? Close up the honky tonks. I Like the Christian Life. Is that country rock? It's just a straight ahead country song, like you said, you know? So if you appreciate it for what it is, it's great.
My buddies shun me since I turned to Jesus. They say I'm missing a whole world of fun, but I still love them and I sing with pride. I like the Christian life.
Christian life in many ways was bold. I mean, it wasn't the kind of thing that anybody who was like the Byrds, anybody who was part of the counterculture, would state. Things were really beginning to tip culturally at that point and politically. And there was kind of a yearning for something more traditional, some kind of grounding. So setting aside, you know, the religious message of the song, the turn to country music and the turn to a style of music that expressed the kind of sentiments that Christian life did, I think was meant to be reassuring. You know, it was meant to be, you know, there are, you know, it's not all going to collapse. You know, it's not, because it really seemed like this country was shaking.
You almost think like they're trying to be Hicks for whatever reason. And I think it was taken wrong by some people. I don't think they were trying to make fun of country music. I think their love of country music is pretty evident in their music and their statements that they've made. But to someone who didn't know that, who didn't have that context, I could very easily see that, you know, they're trying to make fun of what they think is their idea of redneck music with this. And I'm not sure whether it was just they were trying to be witty and it was maybe a little bit of a misfire, maybe it was a little bit overdrawn what they were trying to do, or it just didn't come off so well.
I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, the tone of Christian life is hard to identify. I mean, if pressed, I would probably say there's an element of parody in it. I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily would take a statement like that dead seriously coming from the Byrds. On the other hand, I don't think it's entirely a parody. I mean, I think it really was a gesture of respect in a certain way for values that were much more traditional than, you know, most of the counterculture, you know, had any interest in embracing.
Sweetheart of the Rodeo was as much a product of the maverick spirit of Graham Parsons as it was of the natural eclecticism of the Byrds. Though Parsons had sung lead vocal on many of the initial recordings, Columbia had insisted that, due to legal complications, these vocals should be replaced by McGuinn. One of the Parsons vocals that did survive the cull is featured on his own composition and album highlight, Hickory Wind.
Hickory Wind was Graham Parsons' definitive statement. I think it was, you know, it's up there with either the best, second best maybe song he ever did, and it's a wonderful song. It's a standard, and thank goodness A, he sang it, and B, that it was included on the album, because it would have been that much poorer without it. But I'm sure that every single member of the Byrds at that time, and the producer Gary Usher, would have known straight away that that was a song that was a potential standard, and that was Graham Parsons at his best.
In South Carolina, there are many tall pines. I remember the oak tree that we used to climb.
Hickory Wind is one of Graham's anthems. I think one of his biographers actually titled their book Hickory Wind. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the great Byrds songs and one of the great Graham Parsons songs.
Keeps calling me home, Hickory Wind.
The Byrds' Nashville adventure extended beyond the confines of the studio, with an attempt to embrace the wider culture surrounding country music. They altered their image from countercultural hip to clean-cut conservative in a concession to the notoriously fastidious country and western scene, the hardcore of which they would encounter by performing at the Grand Ole Opry.
What you have to remember is the battle lines were drawn at this point. You know, country music in 1968 was drinking music for rednecks to cry into their beer over. You know, it was the antithesis of what was happening on the street with the anti-Vietnam War protests. Country music wasn't protesting about the Vietnam War. It might have the odd sentimental song about you know, a soldier who gets killed and his sweetheart, you know, breaking her heart back home in Kentucky or whatever. But it certainly wasn't protesting the Vietnam War. So, you know, I don't think you can underestimate what a radical thing it was for the Byrds to make Sweetheart of the Rodeo. Then to take it into the sort of the belly of the beast in Nashville and try and play that music to these rednecks in the audience at the Grand Ole Opry was an equally extraordinary thing to do. And of course they were hated for it.
They were definitely had their share of catcalls when they went up there. It was, you know, it was just the whole Nashville protocol thing. The idea of having a rock and roll group playing in the revered sanctuary of the Grand Ole Opry was not something that the Nashville establishment would have particularly welcomed.
Some groups wanted to be country because they were smart enough to know that we, the collective we of the 60s, scared the hell out of a lot of people. And we wanted to find entente. We wanted to get back with those people and be able to deal with them and address them. I think that country thing was probably a tool to get into and to communicate something to a broader audience and not just preach to the choir. That idea of getting two audiences together was something that was both a stumbling block and a blessing for the Byrds at that point when they decided to take a country gander.
There was a reason why these communities were divided. You know, it wasn't just about music. So they were attempting to make inroads, and successfully, ultimately. But at the time, it was bold from both aspects, because they were both, I think, alienating a number of their own fans, and then moving into a world that was not likely to be that receptive to musicians that looked like the Byrds.
And the reception given to the Byrds was frosty at best. The band returned to Nashville towards the end of the year, an event that John York recalls as a particularly fraught experience.
We were